Maybe you need to spend more on getting that local knowledge, but that's what you have to do in Japan, and it's just one of those things. But I think the rewards and benefits of dealing with Japan are so much more bigger than that.
Most brands are looking for new markets where there's strong consumer demand and buying power. Yet most overlook Japan. Too complicated, takes too long to get into the market, then there's the language barrier and cultural differences. Many would rather avoid it rather than risk possible failure. But what if the Japanese market wasn't as challenging as it looks? What if brands could actually do quite well there, if they just understood what to do and how to do it? I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me on A Seat at the Table. The Japanese market might be different from other markets, but there are huge opportunities for brands that offer high-quality products, according to Catherine O'Connell, a New Zealander who opened her own law firm in Japan. Catherine has helped many international brands successfully enter and navigate the Japan market. In today's episode, she helps us demystify and decode many of the commonly held and often incorrect assumptions about what it takes to break into the market. According to Catherine, Japan isn't about a quick win. It's about long-term investment for long-term returns. If you're willing to make the commitment and use a local playbook, there's lots of opportunity, especially for niche brands. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop knitwear collections that will be a hit in any market, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair is a rich resource featuring well-edited, high-quality collections as well as cutting-edge technical innovation. Not to mention outstanding trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. You can learn more at www.spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. There's also a link in the show notes. And check out our website. You can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table, the show notes, news about our upcoming events, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at www.seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Now, let's find out from Catherine how we can build our brand in Japan. I'm really delighted to have you on the podcast, Catherine, because I think as we were talking about before, a lot of people look at the Japanese market and they think to themselves, it's a big market, right? It's a market where people have spending power. But on the other hand, people are very intimidated. It seems very confusing. Especially if you're used to selling into primarily either the US or Europe or Australia, New Zealand. Any of those markets seem more familiar. So I thought it was really interesting that you have so much in-depth experience in Japan, and perhaps you can shed a light on some of this for us.
Yeah, I mean, Japan is the world's third largest in GDP. It's manufacturing 25% of all the high-tech products in the world and 30% of cars. So if you're not in Japan, you're missing out, right, on a really, really great market. And just focusing on language and culture seems a little bit of what Japanese would say, mottainai. It's such a waste to dismiss Japan because of those reasons, right? And especially because you can actually get help on the ground by people such as myself or others who've been here for a long time. I've been here nearly 20 years. So if you call on the local experts, that's what you should be doing. And I don't think that's any different to any other country, right? There might be a myth then that, Japanese and American business practices are different. But yeah, maybe some of them are. But the differences are also there between US and New Zealand, for example. I'm from New Zealand, right? And I see those differences between the US and Germany. And you're sort of saying that at the beginning there. So like any country outside of your home country, you're going to have to know the local market. So don't be put off just by the language barrier. You can find a bilingual lawyer or bilingual accountant like me who can help you. So maybe it's a little bit more involved. And maybe you need to spend more on getting that local knowledge, but that's what you have to do in Japan. And it's just one of those things. But I think the rewards and benefits of dealing with Japan are so much more bigger than that.
I think that a lot of times people also think that Japan is really built on these long, well-established relationships, right? That's something that's, I don't know whether that's truth or legend or a little bit of each. And so a lot of people, particularly nowadays when everything is about speed, sort of look at Japan and say, well, we'd have to start working on this and maybe see the fruits of our efforts 10 years down the road. Is that still the case, that it takes such a long lead time, or have things changed a bit?
I would say yes, and yes again. But I'll give you some other tips in there too. But coming to Japan does mean you are committing for the long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We've just had the Olympics, Paralympics. So I've got a lot of metaphors that are related to sports. It's a decathlon, right? With lots of different parts to it rather than 100 meters. So you really need to study about the facts and customs in Japan. And indeed, you need to build those relationships and take care of those relationships. Nothing about that has changed. For example, here, mostly someone will introduce you to another person. Most relationship building starts with an introduction. And so you step on the tailcoats of that person who introduced you. And so there's an immense amount of trust that you've already cut through and built up through that introduction. And you can never treat that lightly. So always know, why or whom you're having relationships with. And that person who introduces you normally knows and can guide you how to move away or avoid certain relationships as well. So yes, I would say that. On the speed thing, you mentioned about things getting faster and doing things faster. Well, Japan is well renowned for its paperless, not lack of paperless society. And so there are a lot of paper processes. Japan has been working on that during COVID-19. Things have sped up. The new digital agency was actually set up last week, which is attempting to cut down some of the paperwork and bureaucracy across different agencies, government agencies in Japan. It's quite a maze. So those sort of slower processes, I think, also test your mettle here, Jane. It means if you've got that patience and the strength to stick around, Japan's kind of testing you that you are suitable for the market, that you're going to stay, that you're not going to be a fly-by-night. And so for me personally, taking nearly a year to set up my own law practice, I think they were also testing me that I was actually going to stick around and be a lawyer in this market and not take off and had real roots here. And that was after having a very long relationship with Japan. So I would say very much yes to relationships. I don't think that will ever go, but there's a little bit of change with the speeding up of things.
I think that's really interesting. And I think you're right. There's good and bad to everything. On the one hand, yes, maybe it's frustrating for people who are looking to get into the market and have a quick win. But on the other hand, like you say, it really separates the men from the boys, so to speak.
Sure does. And I think people here can have a kind of relationship radar, and they know whether you're here for a quick win or whether you're determined to be here for a lot longer. And by here, I mean, even now when people can't come to Japan, they can't enter Japan right now, still able to do relationship building over the internet. I have heard and I have seen it in front of me happening. So that's still very important. The internet does not cut down that process. It in fact makes it even more deeper.
That's really interesting. And it really opens up in many ways some opportunities for people.
It definitely does. Yeah.
Now, when we were talking about entering Japan, building product awareness and so forth before, you had mentioned that there were opportunities for brands to work with some of the smaller or niche influencers. Perhaps we can talk about that a little bit, because I don't know if that ties in with building credibility for your brand as a newcomer, if that's sort of a workaround or a strategic opportunity. I mean, how do you see that?
Right. Well, these kinds of influencer endorsements are really very similar to celebrity endorsements, aren't they, really? And they've been around for years and years and years. It's not a new thing. It's just the way that it's being done. And in Japan, the influencer market is rip-roaring. It's absolutely booming. And you're seeing it over Instagram, TikTok, of course. But the most popular platform here in Japan is actually Line.
Oh, yes.
Have you heard of Line?
Yeah, absolutely.
Line is where it's happening. And so people are using that very, very readily, and it's the most popular apart from LinkedIn or Facebook or any of those, even Instagram or TikTok, it's Line. So in Japan recently, I have seen an uptick in the use of influencer agreements. So brands are specifically asking influencers to create that valuable and relevant content. And it's really useful for a particular campaign, short period, not for a long period, usually very short period, to either show a new brand or one that's just come in and building a little bit more and really zipping it further forward. So I really think they are something that can be very good for a brand. You also need to obviously look on the other side. If an influencer does something a little bit naughty, shall we say, that could bruise the image of the brand, right? So all of those things need to be covered in a really good partnership or influencer marketing agreement. But it can be, I guess it could be a shortcut. Jane, you mentioned that, but like shortcuts in life and business, sometimes they do come with sacrifices on other things. For example, I'd be very careful about shortcutting anything to do with quality for Japan.
Right.
Packaging that's slightly damaged, a damaged corner or a slight rip or something that's been just packaged very, very quickly, you will find that won't sell. It has to look perfect, even if the contents aren't that good.
Right.
The packaging has to be top class. So those are a couple of things just to be careful with influencers, that you are making sure you're keeping the quality and not shortcutting on those things. And I would also say that the researching the market is very important, seeing where that influencer is already doing things with other brands, following the demographic that you're after, the targets that you're after, and any kind of behavioral characteristics as well that you're trying to target. My clients are sort of looking at those sorts of profiles of people and then going after them and actually directly approaching. And you can do that when they are someone that you follow on Instagram or online. You can just send messages to them. So that's quite an interesting aspect, and I really recommend it.
Right. So you can simply reach out to some of these influencers directly, get in touch, talk about whether they would like to be promoting your product, and then beyond that, you can set up a more formalized contract to work with them.
Right, because mostly in the past, it's gone to an agency and the agency picks who they would put on that brand.
Right.
More often than not. But in this way, you can go directly to the influencer. And then the influencer goes to their agency, says, I want to wear those sunglasses. I want to wear those kinds of track trousers, whatever it might be. So it's kind of reversing the impact in the relationship there on who is going first. So the influencer will say what they want to wear. And then the approach from their agency comes to the company that's made the inquiry. It's quite a different route these days.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, talking about selling into Japan, top of mind nowadays would be that cross-border sales, right? Which has become so big, particularly with e-commerce. How does that work coming into Japan? I mean, certain countries are very easy, especially to get small packages under a certain value in. But how does that in Japan? Are you able to do that kind of cross-border easily?
Yes, you can. I would say by far the most common method is still having the agent or the distributor in Japan. One of my clients imports products and distributes them as well. Usually the importer and distributor are separate parties, but some are doing it themselves. So they'll import and distribute. So then they're in charge of the whole process. And have responsibility, obviously, as a result. But e-commerce has definitely increased in Japan over this last year and a half. During COVID-19, consumer patterns have just radically changed, and 40% of people have moved from that brick and mortar and from buying from distributors, trying to buy directly through e-commerce. So it's certainly very, very big. And, the growth, I think, year over year has been about 9 to 10% increase. And that's quite a lot because, in Japan, the penetration rate of the internet is 93%. So you've really got a very, very highly developed market. And the other thing that also works so well in Japan is the infrastructure on distribution. You cannot beat the delivery guys here, the Sagawa and Yamato and all of these brands that will deliver. And when they're not home and you ask them to redeliver, and they say they will come between 9 and 12, they will definitely be there between 9 and 12. They won't turn up 5 days later. So that's really
incredible.
important. But For US companies, if we use that as an example, using e-commerce channels to reach Japan, I think you need to look at shipping and logistics and payment methods, customer service and returns and after sales are really key. And that's where the distributor model works very well in Japan instead of e-commerce, because you have to have someone here to look after the customer. And as I said before, the fast return on looking after them is so important. So same time zone, same language. If you can't respond to your client quickly, your customer quickly, if something goes wrong, you'll really lose in this market. So that's a big reason why distributor model is still very popular in Japan, because of that contact that's necessary with the customer.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
So it's not just about having a very high quality product, which, as you said earlier, is absolutely critical in Japan, from the product to the packaging, but it's also about having that same level of customer service.
Sure. And it's not just selling to the customer, it's everything else that happens after it. And after sales service here is really, really important. Yes.
Right. So it's probably less inclined to be a cross-border ideal model for Japan. And like you said, more important to establish yourself on the ground with distributors so that you're able to really deliver on that customer service.
Sure. I mean, you would be using platforms such as Amazon, for example. And so a lot of e-commerce is coming in that way. That's definitely sure. Or you would order a product, but usually it will come to a distributor and the distributor will still send it to you and make it look like it's pure e-commerce, but it's actually not. A kind of hybrid in the background there. Yeah. But because the distributor model works very, very well in Japan, it shouldn't be underestimated. And that e-commerce is the way to go, because when you hit that hybrid of e-commerce plus distributor or plus the local transport company, it really does work very well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because oftentimes people think, oh, if this is the way we used to do something, then we need to completely throw that out when something new comes along.
Right.
And I think what you're pointing out is you don't want to necessarily dismantle the part of the system that works.
Exactly. I mean, it is brilliant. I don't know if there's any other distribution network within other countries that is as good as Japan. It really is top class.
Wow, incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not easy to do. I think, as we know in most markets, that last mile is so difficult for so many companies.
And especially during this COVID-19, so many people had to wait a long time for deliveries. Japan didn't. Right. We still got our deliveries easily. So being at home and working at home and having deliveries done was an absolute blissful experience. There wasn't anything of the kind of trouble that other people had in different countries. So we sort of had quite a smooth time in terms of deliveries. So don't underestimate it would be my tip.
Yeah, I think that's important, because like you said, I mean, so many people would be looking to get rid of that and think that it's too many levels and, can't we streamline this? But if there's a system that works, why not leverage it?
Yeah, and think about too that after sales service, when something does go wrong, you've got somebody there. You're not having to be rung in the middle of the night or having to deal with something or have a translator to help you with things. The distributor normally can do all of that for you. And there is a benefit and a value in that. It can't be underestimated as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of companies all over the world are starting to realize the importance of customer service, particularly in building brand trust and brand loyalty, that it's no longer about just pushing cheap products out there and being able to get away with that. It's, consumers nowadays want a lot more than that.
They certainly do, especially Japan. I think if you can make it in Japan, they say you can make it anywhere. because of the quality that is required and the customer demand, right, for that kind of quality. I've heard there's a difference between, say, Japan and Korea. So as I mentioned to you before, the product packaging could be damaged and inside it may not be the best product, but it looks good. Whereas, say, for Korea, they are very much concentrating on the content of the product, on the inside of the box. If the box is a bit damaged, doesn't matter. So again, noticing those differences and not treating, say, other Asian countries the same as Japan is also really important.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, oftentimes people just lump everybody together and forgetting about the nuances that are so critical in each market.
Exactly. Yeah.
So as a lawyer, what are some of the legal issues that brands or companies that are selling non-food, not pharma, none of those kind of complicated categories, but if you're doing apparel or home textiles or any of those kind of products, what might you need to be aware of when you're selling into Japan that might not be such an issue, perhaps in other countries?
Yeah, well, Japan is a very highly regulated country. And so regulations around, for example, advertising, regulations around promotions, and especially around labeling. So those things are actually very, very important here. And it's because Japan is a civil law-based country as opposed to, say, the States or New Zealand, Australia, or England, which are common law countries. So all of the laws have come basically from Europe into Japan, and they're all sort of codified statutes contained within 6 books, the 6 laws of Japan. So everything is basically within those books. It's not a case law system as we have in the States. So it's very much regimented towards those regulations. And so generally speaking, one of the things here is you can ask a Japanese lawyer X, Y, and Z, and they will be able to tell you the answers pretty quickly because it's all in the law book. Right? They don't have to think about precedent, although there is, of course, court cases that make a difference to some of those things. But generally speaking, it's all there for you. But in that sense, too, if you ask A, B, C question and you don't ask D or E or what else should we know, Japanese lawyers won't go into the details of other things that you probably should know. So you've got to be very careful here to ask all the questions you want to ask, and always ask a catch-all question. Is there anything else we should know? Is there any other risk we should be aware of? I know in my practice as a common law lawyer from New Zealand and from the UK, trained in both and qualified in both, that we always say, by the way, you need to know these things as well, or let us know if you'd like more questions or more answers on these questions, because these are things that typically you need to know as well. So we would give that little hint, and then the client would give us the go-ahead to do that, right? The other thing I think here in Japan, negotiation of contracts is hardly ever done face-to-face. I know as my upbringing as a lawyer, my training was always, across the table with another lawyer. And here in Japan, yes, even though so many relationships are very important, the contracting aspect is often not face-to-face. And some lawyers will do phone calls, but they probably wouldn't do a Zoom call like we're having tonight, where I see your face and I can see you. Right? That's often not happening, even now during this pandemic. So that's another thing to keep in mind, and that a lot will go by email. And that's so they've also got time to decipher it if it is in another language, if it's in English. But generally speaking, even amongst Japanese lawyers, they often do not get on the phone or, get on a Zoom call, for example. It's changing a little bit, and that is a generalization, but that's one thing. The other thing is that contracts are themselves very, very different to what we might see in English language contract or a common law drafted contract. Japanese language contracts or contracts that are based on Japanese law are usually quite vague, that people will use their best endeavors to do something, right? They won't say and set out what the process should be. Again, that's based on the laws that I mentioned before, because if you say they use their best endeavors, there's a definition of that in the law. What should be done? What is expected? So there's no need to write it in the contract. But when you first see that, perhaps as somebody from the States or from Europe, you might think, what does best endeavors mean?
Yeah.
Right. What using your best endeavors to reach an amicable agreement? What does that mean? How much do I have to do? What is that? Whereas we're normally more stipulated in an English language contract what is required.
Mm.
And if you're dealing with Japan, of course, Japanese law is often the choice of law, and the court is normally the dispute resolution, place of dispute resolution, not arbitration. Usually companies and businesses go to court, and typically settling outside of court. We call it settling out of court, but actually the court facilitates the settlement in Japan. So it's out of court, but it's actually in court. It means not going through the whole full process. So those are a couple of things that I think cross all of those sorts of general product areas that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's important to know, because it's something that you wouldn't think of as a foreigner trying to sell into Japan. I think we, generally speaking, assume that everything's just the same in every market legally, and that you just have your contract and that's the way it is.
True. And you sometimes think, and I've had two this week, one based on laws of Italy and one based on laws of the state, one of the states in America, that can just be translated into Japanese and used here. And that's never the case, because there's always differences on the warranties, indemnities, and all of those things, which are very, very differently phrased and obviously depend on the civil law in Japan. So you can't just pick up an agreement and place it into Japan in a translated form. It usually doesn't work at all. The layout is different. The ordering is different. As I said, the phraseology is very different as well. So I think it would be wrong to assume that you can just have an English language confidentiality agreement, for example, translated into Japanese and use it in Japan. It's usually better to ask a lawyer to have it constructed from the get-go and have it a fresh new document. Yeah.
I'm coming from the US, so we are quite litigious, and nobody who's sold on a big scale into the consumer market there has not at some point or another found themselves in a legal situation.
Right.
Is it much like that in Japan, or are court cases for consumer goods tend to be less frequent?
Most court cases to do with consumer goods are, again, decided outside of court, are settled before they get to court. But if it's something that has a big public interest, it will normally go through the whole process. But I would say that most companies here do try to not go to litigation. But these days, Japanese companies are becoming much more savvy and are quite aware that other countries do like to litigate. And so they tend to bolster their agreements a little bit more around the litigation or dispute resolution clauses. So they try to make those a little bit more robust these days. But they know inevitably, if they're probably contracting with an overseas party, an American counterpart, that they're probably going to end up in court if there's something going wrong.
Oh my gosh. And what about on the consumer side of things? Are consumers as inclined to take legal action if they're dissatisfied, or is that just not done?
So consumers will complain, will most definitely complain, and make a big fuss about things. One of my clients produces computers, and a client of theirs, a customer of theirs, has been arguing since 2016 to have this computer replaced all the time. There's always some small problem with it. It gets fixed, and then they complain about something a little bit later. They want it replaced, or they want it upgraded. Right. So something better than what they bought before. And this is a continuing thing. And so the other company is a large company, but it can't risk denying those claims or denying those, replacements and upgrades of the computer, because they risk that customer going out there and saying things about the company quite verbally, right, everywhere.
Right.
So on those channels we just mentioned before, Line and other places. So customers very much have a voice. In Japan, customer is king. They are called customer is king. Customer is not God, but customer is king. So they rule the land. So very well voiced, and you wouldn't want to hurt a customer who is a consumer here at all, because of the repercussions on your branding, your reputation.
Right. So it's basically the same situation that you would have in other markets.
Yes, I don't think it's any different. It can take quite a bit for a customer to be upset. But again, the one that I mentioned just now, pretty rogue, complaining every few months to be antagonizing, I expect. But customers will often wait. Consumers will wait for a while, but when it's just got beyond their tether,
Right.
and that perhaps, for example, the company hasn't been fast in responding, like I mentioned before, they will just start to react and expect everything, and that often happens. And that's the expectation that customers have here. And again, people selling to these customers and consumers know that they have that expectation on them as they're selling.
Yeah, I think what you were saying earlier about having that superb level of customer support probably helps to mitigate some of the more egregious claims.
Yes, I think so. And also having that cushion between you and the consumer directly is also something that's really, really very helpful here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if people feel that they have a channel where they can talk to somebody, it tends to diffuse the situation, doesn't it?
It does.
Now, just one more question, and that is, if a company is looking to sell into Japan, what kind of a timeline would they be looking at from the time that they decide, okay, we'd like to sell into Japan, and then they need to set up whatever they need to set up in terms of perhaps registering their name or finding an agent, like you say, going through whatever legal processes, roughly speaking, and obviously every case is different. Roughly, what would they be looking at, do you think?
Yeah, it also depends if they want to set up in Japan and have somebody here, because that will also take you into immigration realm. And so you'll need to have the right kind of visa to be able to be operating as a representative director here, or having a subsidiary of your US company, for example. And so that can be anything from 8 to 10 or 12 weeks to just get the visa. Right. And so while you're doing that, you can prepare other things, but you can't set up your bank account, for example, until you've got your visa status approved. So those processes in Japan are still actually quite difficult and take a long time. And that's where that relationship and making sure that you've got the stamina to be able to build your business, but not actually be able to sell anything for a number of months. So I would say from the get-go, when you ask someone to help you, you have to get your legal advice and get your company set up and know what the status of that company should be. Should it be a subsidiary? Should it be a branch office? Should it be an independent company here, a Japan company? Registering your .co.jp internet address, for example, those things, that's all done in Japanese. Having your lawyer on hand, obviously wrapping all the legal structure of your company around what the accounting situation should be, accounting and tax. So there's a lot of that. So I think it would take anywhere from 8 to 10, maybe 12 months. So if you were starting now, you might get through in summer next year. And again, visas right now aren't being processed. There's a number of things you can do. But if you wanted to come and set up in Japan right now, it'd be very difficult. However, you could have somebody here as your representative. And often the distributors can be the representatives here too. So there are ways and means around that. But certainly, again, it's the long game, and you can't really come in and have a company set up in a couple of weeks. It takes a long time, and the visa process as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, how open is Japan to attracting foreign investment of small to medium size? Obviously, it's very different when a big multinational decides that they want to come in. But if it's a small to medium size enterprise, is it open to come in, or what, in your opinion, would that be?
Yeah, I think SMEs are welcome to come in, but the problem in Japan, of course, is that Japan can be a little bit anti-competitors coming in. So if you've got something that's against a brand that's already here, that can be a tricky thing. But also not understanding that Japan has a lot of very strong local companies. You know, for example, companies like Vodafone and eBay and Uber did not come and do very well in Japan. They lost in Japan. You know, Wendy's, fast food chain, right? They lost in Japan because I think they didn't get the local market and the regulatory situation. And so some of those companies will not, if you don't understand that Japan has a lot of big brands, that's a problem. So an SME trying to compete against a large company is a difficult thing. But on the other hand, the majority of companies in Japan are actually SME size.
Interesting.
96%. 96% of Japanese companies are SME size. And so often they will want to look at M&A with another similar sized company or a larger, slightly larger SME that can help them along with their local or regional product. Right. So we hear a lot about the larger Japanese brands, but actually I think there are possibilities for SMEs to link up with other SMEs or a slightly bigger SME in the States, for example, to link up with Japan. Right. And again, there are market entry experts in Japan, and market entry is a very important and well-respected role that people have here. And I know several market entry specialists who deal with this all the time, and they're the ones that can match people very, very well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to know, because a lot of times people, in some respects, overestimate what they could achieve and how they might be received, and other people underestimate it.
For sure. That's definitely true. Yes.
Yeah, I think, you've brought so many important things to light, Catherine. If people want to connect with you, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to get in touch with you and perhaps ask other questions specific to their own businesses, how can they contact you?
Catherine O'Connell Law is where you'll find me. You'll also see that I run a podcast called Lawyer on Air. I interview a lot of Japanese and foreign lawyers in Japan, and that's another way to find out about the way that business is done here. So I'd encourage people to sign up, subscribe to that podcast. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm always posting about business aspects, flexible working, aspects to do with business in Japan. And so that's where you can find me. So please connect with me if you've heard this and would like to talk a little bit more. I'm happy to do that. Connect with me on LinkedIn or through my website.
Well, I'll make sure to put all of those links in the show notes. And I thank you so much for taking your time. I've learned a tremendous amount that I really didn't know about the nuances of doing business in Japan. So I really appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks so much, Jane, for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their expertise, experience, and insights about succeeding in business and in life. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. You can also find the link in the show notes for this episode. And don't forget to check out our podcast website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of the Seat at the Table podcast, the show notes, news about our upcoming masterclass series, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.